right now. Okay. So thank you for joining us today. I'm Devin Waugh, the instruction librarian for NC Live. I'm excited and happy to introduce Julie Raynor, who will be facilitating this webinar. Julie has worked at High Point Public Library since 2006. She manages their digital collections and provides instruction for staff and the public on accessing those collections. So she was a perfect fit for this topic. She's served on the executive committee of NCLA's Technology and Trends Roundtable from 2013 to 2019 in a variety of roles. And now she currently serves on the executive committee of the NC Digital Library Consortium. She's worked as a public librarian for over 20 years, serving as the branch manager of the King Public Library for 7 years before she moved to High Point. But before we get started, I want attendees to keep two things in mind. The first one being, if we run into any sort of internet connections, which can happen, I'll let you know and we'll try and get things running as smoothly as possible. Second thing, if you have to leave at any point, feel free. This session will be entirely recorded, and Julie has shared her slides for us to take advantage of later today. I'll be sending out an email with the link to the recording, the slides, and a follow-up survey. And just a rule of thumb for anybody who's in the session, make sure that you're muted. We just want to make sure that there's no audio interference. And with that being said, I'm going to have Julie take it away.
Hello, everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming. This is a topic that I have presented on before, but we felt like it was a good time to review it with all of the ways we've been having to provide our services remotely so much over the past months or so. The topic is ebook assistance from a distance, and we're going to look at this in a couple of different pieces. I want to talk about just some general ideas about how to introduce your digital book collections to the public, then different ways to provide instruction based on learning abilities and comfort level with computers and those kinds of things. Then we'll talk about the actual distance part of this, which is something that I've been thinking about a lot here lately. And then also the technical difficulties that always come up, the best ways to address those with your users, either in person or remotely. I'll have some time at the end for questions, but I'm going to have some time throughout for questions as well. And I want to get your input, so we're doing this in a way that we'll get feedback from everybody every once in a while. So feel free to participate if you'd like to. Also, I tend to be fairly informal. So, even if you have questions along the way, please put those in chat and we'll get to those in my little pauses that I have built in. I also have some additional resources that'll be at the end of the presentation for some things that I talk about today. All right, let's jump in. Some words of wisdom to get us going. I thought this was appropriate, but one of the things that we all know is how we so much try to serve the needs of our communities, try to get information, resources into the hands of people who are wanting those resources, and how this a lot of times is a person's first stop for information. So just thought that was a particularly appropriate way to get started. So before I jump into my information, here's our first interactive piece. I wanted to know from you all what challenges you experience while you're providing instruction for your digital collections, either with your staff, with your public, with whatever those are. So I want to go ahead and open that up if you'd like to participate.
So go to menti.com and enter the code 9592560, and that'll allow you to participate in any questions or polls that we'll be using today.
I see one person has put into chat just the multitude of devices out there that make it difficult. That is definitely an issue, and I'm going to share with you how I approach that with my staff when I'm training people and with the public as well. Hard to explain digital rights management? Yes, indeed. They think it's digital, so of course you can get it automatically when you want it right away every time, which again is hard to explain to people. Go ahead and move on. If you have any other comments, we'll put those into, just put those into chat. So when you're getting ready to start working with the public, for me, it's best to go back to the basics. When I'm talking with my staff members, and this goes for all staff, this isn't just the people that are good with technology, but I feel like anybody that works a public service desk should be able to answer these 3 questions when people ask them about the ebooks. Number 1 is if they walk up and they say, "Do you have ebooks?" You should be able to say, "Yes, we have them." But even before we get to that point, the 3 questions that I like to make sure people are asked is, number 1, do you have a library card? Because if you don't have an active library card, you won't be able to access the digital collections. So that'll be the first step in making sure they can get that done. Or they'll have a library card from another state or another part of the country, I mean, county, anyway. It's one of those things. You have to make sure they have a valid card with your library. If there is a specific title that they're looking for, if they saw something in the catalog and it was listed as an ebook and they want to know how to get it, sometimes knowing that title is helpful because there are so many different digital collections that are out there. It would save everybody time if you go ahead and find out which collection you need to share with them, the instructions, rather than try to share all of the collections with people every time they come in. So it's good to kind of narrow that down. And also what format they want. If they prefer audiobook, then you'll know you have certain directions you can go in. If you know that one of your collections is stronger with audiobooks, then you'll know to take that person to that collection first. So those are the basic questions that I ask our users when they come in and they start asking about the ebooks. That's what I need to know to get them to the next step. The next part is what I started to mention before, which is every person that works a service desk in the library should be able to answer basic questions about your digital collection. They don't have to know how to explain it. They don't have to know how the devices work. They don't know how to be able to do the technical stuff, but what they should know is, do you have ebooks? Does the library have ebooks? And they should all know that. They should know where to go to find them, where on the website you go to get started, what the website addresses are. If you have special web pages set up for training, they should know how to get to those. Then they should also know who the experts are. If people ask questions that are beyond the basics, they should know who the people are that could help them navigate their collections in a more thorough way. Those are the three things that the average staff person should know. Then there's the third piece of this, which is what I call, what's our typical of many libraries nowadays is the train the trainer approach, which is once you have the digital collections, you should be able to identify the staff members that have the technical ability or have the interest in the digital collections. That's the first sort of piece of this, is to make sure that you find people that can do it. The next piece, which is sometimes overlooked, is that they have the right personality. Many people know a whole lot about the digital collections, but are not as skilled at explaining it to other people. So you need to be able to find people that are patient mainly, and who are flexible, who can if they get an off-the-wall question, sometimes that happens, they need to be able to be flexible with how they go about answering it. Any previous teaching experience is also helpful, because then they will know sort of the way to quickly determine the knowledge level of the person that they're talking to and how to customize their training information to that person at that level. And that's sort of the fourth piece as well, which is understanding the learner. What's their technical ability? What's their learning style? Are they visual? Then they might want a handout or a video to watch. If they are auditory, they might want to be able to see the information, see the website, but also listen to somebody explain it, or a combination of both, which is what most people are. So you have to be aware that there's lots of different ways to communicate this to folks. So what tools do you need to get this done? I have found over the years that there's basic ways to do this, just as we do for any reference interaction that we come across in our work. There is the print information handouts. What I have found is when I began working with the North Carolina Digital Library, I ended up having to teach it to myself. So my first goal was, after I felt pretty comfortable with it, I knew I would then have to explain it to our users. And my goal was, could I get this to a 5-step process? How could I simplify it so that it was just the basic information? It wasn't information that maybe an advanced user might need to know or might want to know, just the basics of what you had to know to get started. And that took a lot of work. I mean, it's not the easiest thing to come to. You have to put a lot of effort. And I was constantly tweaking those handouts and instruction guides for lots of different reasons. Keep it clear and simple. Don't use the terminology that could be confusing. And also, along with that, terminology is important because these interfaces for these digital collections, they like to change their interface regularly, like sometimes without warning. So you're going along explaining something to somebody, and all of a sudden, the wording for the page goes from, I can't think of a good example, but I know with Overdrive, it's changed its terminology. What's a bookshelf? You know, what is it? That was one of those that I've constantly wondered about, like, why can't we use different words? So anyway, just anything that you think might be confusing is probably going to be even more confusing to your user because you have a sort of a working knowledge of the collections. The other thing that I think about with the handouts is having the clean screenshots. And what I mean, I'll show you sort of some examples of that here in a minute, but a lot of people benefit from the visuals and having, you know, accurate, really clear screenshots of what they're going to see when they do different things is very, very helpful. And it's easy to do. If you have Microsoft Office, some of the newer suites of that, you can crop images within those. You don't even have to have any special software. If you have Microsoft Word, you can do it. So it's not anything hard to do, but I think it's important. Also, I sort of alluded to it, but be prepared for frequent revisions because these collections are going to be constantly updating. The upside of that is they're constantly updating it because they're listening to librarian feedback. So if librarians ask for things, then they do eventually get around to adding those in. And that goes for the users as well. They, you know, they'll provide feedback as well, and they are constantly listening and feeding that into their, you know, their queue of improvements. At least that's the experience I've had with Overdrive over the years. They really want to know what's helpful. The next piece is sort of the video tutorial. This is also fairly easy because there's some that are already made. All the digital collections have produced video tutorials, shorter the better, 2 to 3 minutes. If the person, you know, feels good with computers, you can get to those easily and share those with them. The help pages are great. I'll show you those here in a minute. Just anything that the vendors have done that they've created, use that. Don't try to reinvent anything unless you just feel compelled for some reason to do it. If there's something that isn't covered that you have a lot of questions about, feel free to do it at that point. And there are also ways to do your own tutorials that are fairly straightforward as well. And I'll get to that in a little bit as well. So a lot of times, especially right now, your interactions about your digital collections are going to be over email or the phone. This is not always ideal. It depends on the complexity of the question. And it really will rely upon your communication skills as a librarian to make sure that you're understanding what they're needing and what they're wanting and what's going on their end, and then being able to then clearly explain the steps on how to solve the issue or get to the book that they're looking for, that sort of thing. And I would always supplement whatever interactions you had with print tools, with the videos, with the handouts. And I always will follow up. If you've worked with somebody, especially if it's for any length of time, and you gave your instruction, sent them a handout, say over an email, and then didn't hear from them for a few days, you might just want to send a quick follow-up email and say, hey, just wanted to make sure that you were able to get to what you wanted to. If you have any other questions, you know, let's do it again. Same kind of thing with, it's a version of the reference interview that all of us are used to doing at the reference desk. So it's nothing too it's really not that much more complicated than that. Somebody mentioned the DRM, which is the digital rights management earlier, and I'll go ahead and throw that in here. When you're explaining the collections to people, the best way that I know how to explain that is to look at it from, this is a collection that is managed by this company, and we as the library are proud to be able to provide free access to you for that collection. There's some conditions to it. The trade-off is that the company that manages it does all the negotiations with the authors and the publishers about granting access to these books. That's what the library doesn't have any control over. So, for example, with Overdrive, if something is checked out, then you may have to wait on it. So, it is because this is sort of where the beneficiaries, of this company that's taking the hard part of doing the negotiating, taking that out of our responsibility, then we can then better provide the information to you about how it works. And usually I have found if you explain why about something like that, that is all you really need to do. And also if it's out of your control, that helps too. I mean, if it's somebody else, Overdrive is the one that does that. I mean, if you can push it off onto somebody else, then they are, understanding. And there have been so many times when a very interested person has wanted to go down the publishing rabbit hole with me, which is a whole other topic, a whole other webinar about how the publishers work with libraries with digital collections. So anyway, but just explaining that digital rights management piece of it, not everybody needs to know, but sometimes it's good to just say, yes, it seems like you should be able to get this right away, but because of the way this is managed for us, we have limitations on what we can provide. So that kind of goes into that a little bit. So I was talking about the screenshots. So I took a screenshot of the North Carolina Digital Library homepage. This is what that would look like, just as, in its bare bones state. This to me is got extra stuff in it that we don't need. If you're just trying to show, this is the results list for a search for David Baldacci books, as you can see. That's not what I want to show them. They don't need to see, the URL and my little icons at the bottom of the screen. So you can then go into, like I mentioned, the newer versions of Microsoft Office, all of the software, both Word, Publisher, and PowerPoint can all do this, but you copy that into one of those programs, and then they have a cropping tool. And you could just, move the edges around the piece that you want to include in the flyer. And then you just click away from it and you have a much different image. So it went from this first image with all the extra stuff to just focusing in on the part of the screen that I wanted to demonstrate. So even the print quality is still really good. The images are larger, which, for a lot of folks, you want something on a handout to be readable. So that makes that possible. So that's one of the things that is good to remember about doing those handouts, and have other people look at the handouts with you. I know I've written them and, there are typos all over the place. So it's one of those things to always have a second set of eyes, a third set of eyes to look at them with you. Okay. So I'm going to stop right now and see if there's questions, because I feel like there's some coming in.
think it was mostly folks also recommending the snipping tool in PCs,
Sure,
and the just kind of screen clipping option of
right.
dragging over a section of the screen.
Awesome. That was one of the things I was going to ask as well, is what other tools have people used? And I know a program that I use is one called GIMP, and that does a little bit more than just the image, the cropping. You can do a lot more with it. But it's an open source program that you can get that's fairly easy to use. So that's something that I've been using for a while as well. Just depends on how quickly I need something, what I end up using at that point. Any other questions? Okay. I am going to, here in a moment, share my screen so I can show you some of these, but I mentioned the video tutorials. And I wanted to list out sort of 3 specific ones that everybody, or most everybody, should know about, which is if you have an Overdrive collection, their help screens are incredibly good. Their videos are very nice. They explain processes. They're very short, but they're effective. Also, NC Live has some great resources for the ebooks in their collections, and we'll look at that here in a minute. Not only do they have tutorials on how to use the different collections, they also have this great spot to share. They have, if you have instructional materials on any of the NC Live databases, they want us to share them for everybody else to use. So this is truly a collective experience. So that's something that I'm going to show as well. And something relatively new, the State Library has been offering the Niche Academy resources, and they provide tutorials on all kinds of things. It's not just, it's the library databases, but it's also just general, how to do Excel, job searching tools. And the nice thing about it is they provide so many of them already. And you can also customize, it's customizable because you can create your own. If there's something that you want to highlight from your library, and it's fairly easy, you could either do a video tutorial or you could just do a straight up, it's kind of like, take a PowerPoint presentation and break it up into pieces. There is I know that the State Library has provided some instruction to library staff free of charge, but if you want to have your own Niche Academy tutorials, there is a small cost involved. It's relatively affordable, but I know that you could speak to someone at the State Library about that, and they can get you the details on it. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of this and show you. Okay, can you guys see the Overdrive help screen? Okay, so here's the Overdrive, and it's the help screen that you can find either on the Overdrive website. You can also access it from the app. And what I really wanted to highlight was the videos. I had mentioned, the videos, if we wanted to just, how does it work? And it's a 1-minute little video. If you have specific e-readers, if you want to look at the different ways to listen, the Overdrive Read or Overdrive Listen, there's videos for all of these. So it just depends on what you're looking for, what you'll be able to get to. This is also really great for troubleshooting. So it's a great resource, and they're constantly updating it. And I highly recommend it for library staff and for the public to use. I will sometimes just send them a link to an article from the help menu that just answers their question exactly. They have a comparable resource for Libby. So many people are using the Libby app now. I wanted to show that as well. sort of the getting started stuff. And a lot of this isn't video, but it's still very clear. So we kind of know what you're getting into. And it's easy to navigate. I mean, it's really good. Moving on to NC Live, where you'll go to get their help information is you can simply choose Get Help and then scroll down a little bit and you have a whole section on ebooks. They are just downloading, how to download them. Some of the collections allow it, some don't, specifically on the homegrown ebooks, specifically for Kindle, and then the limits on the use of ebooks that are available through NC Live. And that's a great resource. Right above that is this for library staff. And when I was mentioning before about the promotional materials, they want you to get all that information here. You could also find sort of the shared resources under this for librarians. And if you scroll down to, it's under engage and promote, the share promotional, you can get all kinds of stuff. The logos, materials by resource, which is great because it has all the different resources. Materials by subject. So, I mean, you know, you name it, they've got it. So the ebook stuff is all in one place as well. And they, like I said, they're looking for more information. They have a spot where you could submit your own. So if you've created something that you're proud of and you feel like somebody else might get some benefit from, and it's one of the NC Live resources, please consider sharing. I know they would greatly appreciate that, and so would your colleagues in other libraries. So that's definitely something to think about doing. And one more, I talked about the Niche Academy. Here's ours, and this is our public academy. We have one for staff training as well. I want to show you the public one. What we've done is kind of arranged it into categories. You kind of get a sense here just from looking that it's a combination of general information and specific resources both. Our categories, there's one for downloadable titles. So you'll see the different ones that we have in here. So some of them are longer. This one is this, I don't know why you would need 40 minutes for Libby, but anyway, there's a full out 40-minute Libby tutorial that will tell you everything and anything you would want to know about Libby. Like I said, some of these are videos, some of these are just sort of text-based. It depends on, you know, who created it, how they went about doing it. And the state library can help you with getting those. This is their niche academy resources that anybody could access as well. So I think I'm going to come back to my slides here. Doing another interactive, I don't know what this is doing. This is crazy. Okay, this is from my test I did the other day.
I've never seen it do that before.
Okay, so just want to get a quick poll of if anybody has used any of these training materials to help in their services and what's been useful and what you would recommend to other people, if anything. If we can get it to work. If not, then put it in chat. Okay. And I see somebody's used the Niche Academy, the NC Live tutorials, Libby tutorials. Yes, Libby is constantly being asked about. So anyway,
You click on show results. I think the results are hidden right now.
oh, okay. But that's still that odd thing that it's doing. Okay, so we're trying. This is obviously something new that I haven't done before. So anyway, this is the odd training thing that I did the other day to test it out. So just keep sharing in chat. We can look at it that way. We'll stop again in a moment. Thank you for your patience on this. Another moment to pause and feel like I really feel like that one of the primary missions of librarians everywhere is to teach people how to find, where to look, how to see. So that's one of those things that we're constantly doing with all information, with all people. So that's something to keep in mind, even with the digital collections, where to go to find it. And also looking at it from different perspectives, hearing about it from different people is important as well. And I'll talk about that here in a moment. Okay. So how are we doing this from a distance? A lot of it is building on what I've mentioned before. And I'll talk a little bit about that. We are doing most of our help over email, over the phone. Over the phone is the hardest way to do it, especially when you're not seeing exactly what they're seeing. I was helping somebody the other day with the Kindle Fire, and of course I didn't have a Kindle Fire in front of me, so I was having to see if I could remember what exactly it was supposed to look like. So it happens all the time. From a distance, right now is only going to be slightly different, I feel, when it comes time to be in person. That's where the main significant differences will come. But if we're talking about email or phone distance, that's something I've been doing for a while. The best way to do it is, if you're really going to be organized about it, you'll want to clarify the expectations up front. If you do sort of a quick assessment of what their needs are, and you realize that you're going to have to do some research and look into it, let them know that up front, that, okay, so this is a little bit more involved, and I'm going to have to, get back in touch with you. I'm going to have to send you an email. I'm going to have to call you back tomorrow, and then do that. And also, if it's email or phone, get the information. If it's a technical issue, get the information from them that you need to begin. Consider doing a survey or something like that to get what device are you using, what resource are you using, is it an app, is it a computer, so it's all those things that can factor into how you go about helping them. And also the information that they'll need is, do they have a library card? They'll need their email address and password. Sometimes they need their Amazon or Google login information, and kind of give them a sense of how much time you anticipate it will take. If you're doing a basic instruction, sometimes at 30 to 45 minutes. If it's a more technical difficulty issue, who knows? It could be 15, it could be 2 hours, who knows? Just depending on what it is. And use those handouts. if you're going along and what they really just need is basic information on how to navigate the Libby app. If you have a handout on that, find out if they have an email address and see if they're comfortable, downloading an attachment and try it that way. If they're not, see if you can find a video from one of the vendor sites that would answer their question. So that's the kind of thing that would be helpful. Also, when you're talking about sort of the FaceTime interactions, which is something that some people might appreciate, they might need that. You can do it, as we all know, a variety of different ways. So either Zoom, Google Meet, or just simply FaceTime or Skype. If the person really just wants to see your face and wants to see what you're doing, figure out how to share your screen and make it kind of flipped so they can see, accurately what you're looking at. And this is another time when it's good to know your audience, kind of find out what their expectations are ahead of time. If it's something where you want to try to do a class or try to do a group session over Zoom, try to get a sense of what their, get a survey out, what their comfort level is, what resource they're interested in, if they want ebooks or audiobooks. So try to get as much information like that ahead of time so that you know how to prepare when you're doing the demonstrations. And each time I do a demonstration for somebody when it's new, I do try to get at least that information. Are they interested in ebooks or audiobooks? How are they going to be reading? Do they have a computer? Do they listen in their car? Do they, listen to books at work? It's all those things that it's good to know in advance to help cater your instruction to the audience and to the need, to be respectful of their time as well, because everybody has, certain things that they're doing with their time. And really quickly, the in-person stuff, like I said, is the one where it's going to be the most change. Depending on what you and your library administration have decided, there will be restrictions and regulations on how you do in-person interactions overall. If you're working with somebody at a service desk, for example, we're not touching devices, at least not in my library. So possibly get a stylus, and you can get bulk amounts of styluses. They don't have to be pens, they're just little styluses, and you can get them fairly inexpensively. I have some resources on that at the end of the presentation. Ask them to use a stylus, you use a stylus. It's going to be touchless, so instead of doing what seems natural and both for the user and for yourself, which is to just, ask if you can, use their device and do it for them, rather than doing that, you'll want to really work on how to explain things clearly in terms of steps, especially as you're getting set up. That seems to be the part where people get stuck the most, which is for the setup part of it. So anyway, that's something to think about, is really practice that. Practice how you go about explaining it to others, and make sure it's clear. So when it gets into the more involved stuff, I'll just kind of run through this quickly. Like I've mentioned several times before, is get the information, get as much information as you possibly can if it's a technical issue, because most of the resources have a technical support team and a form to submit it so you can get the help that you need if it's above your head. But before you decide if it's above your head, there are certain things that you can do kind of in the meantime. It's sort of a digital reference interview. So Make sure that you're using your open-ended questions, and this goes for all the interactions with the public. And take your cues from the patron. Pay attention to their knowledge level. Don't presume they know something, but then don't also over-explain either. You can get into some trouble if you try to over-explain something, and that could come across as condescending sometimes. One of the things that's the hardest, I think, for librarians is really just to say, I don't know. And that is perfectly okay to say, I don't know. And you can say, I don't know, and let's learn this together because I feel like this is something that somebody else might need to know, or I don't know, but I know somebody who does know. Bring your colleagues in. Even if it's in your library, use the networking resources that you have with colleagues in different libraries across the state. Use all of those resources. It's, you know, and also take the time to get to the bottom of the issue. If you realize that it's going to take more than 10 minutes while they're standing there or on the phone for you to figure it out, say that to them and say, you know, this is going to be more involved. I need to call you back. So, and I guess I was jumping ahead, but use your resources is asking your colleagues, coworkers, use the customer support options that are available for all the resources. And the also, what on the other side of that is for the folks in your library that do this kind of work, check in with them every once in a while because they will have an experience with somebody that you may not have. And they may be able to share tips and hints that they found along the way and just do sort of an information sharing session periodically because, you know, the whole point of it is for everybody to be able to access the digital collections, no matter who has helped them. And like I mentioned earlier, sometimes hearing something from a different point of view is good. So that's why it's good to ask coworkers to get involved if you're working with somebody. Maybe just hearing it from a different perspective would make more sense to them. And we're gonna, I don't know if will this work, but anyway, I don't know if this is, I was going to do a check-in to see kind of at this point if your confidence level has gone up or not, but I think we're still stuck on my test mode. Sorry about that. But anyway, if you feel like sharing, that would be good to know as well. And to sort of finish off yet another sort of word of inspiration, word of wisdom to put some positive energy out there into the world and to acknowledge how awesome we are. Neil Gaiman is great for doing that. All right. Any other questions? I know that this was a lot to kind of throw out, but you know, I feel like the most important thing is to really think through how you're explaining the digital collections to folks. Really think through how you're training your staff to share this information with people. Some people are better at it than others are. Focus on giving those people an opportunity to shine and to work with the public. That way everybody will be less frustrated because if the people that have the really good training skills are the ones that are doing the training, everybody will benefit. You know, somebody mentioned earlier about how many devices there are out there. That is so true. And what I came to realize is it's more important to know the operating systems than the devices. So there are so many people out there that have smartphones and tablets. So what you should focus on is more learning what the Android platform looks like, how it works, and then learning the differences with the iOS, with the Apple. If you know the basic differences on how those work, how those interact, you are really good. That should cover most bases. It's also good to be familiar with the way that it works on a website, just a regular desktop, regular browser as well, because some people will be doing it that way. But the majority of people are on devices. And if you know the basics of Android and iOS, whatever device they're showing you shouldn't matter. Earlier on in this learning curve for me, people were coming up with these really strange off-brand devices that I didn't even know what they were. Those were tough. Those were truly tough. I didn't know how to work with those. But nowadays, most everybody has either Android or Apple. And also find out which of your coworkers are stronger on each. One of my coworkers took it upon herself to learn everything there was to know about the Kindle Fire. So she's our Kindle Fire person. So that was what we did. So all those different things. Any other questions?
We have a question from Karen asking, initial setup and early use of ebook resources is usually where we have the most questions. It's hard to provide training on setup once the device is already set up. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand exactly what you're looking for. You're talking about if you have a device that's already registered or already is set up with the collection and they're trying to navigate after that point. Okay. So yeah, there are times when I have found that people will have discovered Overdrive is the example I'm thinking of. They've discovered Overdrive in an odd way where they, heard about it or a friend of theirs told them about it and they went to the Overdrive website and they got into it through that pathway, which isn't always the pathway that we show people how to do. So yes, that is tricky because if they have issues, then, these are also tend to be people that are tech savvy. And, in their own right, they are very tech savvy. But if you were to say, for example, it's best to go through the library's, webpage. It's best to go through the NC Digital URL to get there. Like, well, I've always done it this way and this has always worked. So then you get into a little bit of a situation where people don't always want to listen to the advice that you're giving them because they feel like they've already understood it. But going back to the question, with the setup, try the best that you can to explain the way that your collection works, explain sort of the limitations on it, explain that there's best ways to go about doing things. I know that there are a lot of times where people will, try to think of a good example. People will, well, I had a lady who was trying to, it was very complicated, but they were trying to do something that ended up being harder than if they had done it because they had found a backdoor way or they had not talked to somebody at the library before learning how to do it. They learned it on their own. And the way they learned it ended up being harder than the way that we would explain it to them. So just do the best you can with those folks, because sometimes they are open to other ways of doing things, other times they're not. That's where the flexibility of the person working with the patron comes into play. Um, if you've done all you can do, if you've explained all you can explain, and even if it feels like a good idea, possibly bring somebody else in. Say, well, maybe Sandra over here can explain it to you better than I could. If also if you're kind of at your wit's end a little bit and you need just to step away, do that. Bring somebody else in that could handle the question, give them some basic information about what's going on, and then let them kind of take over as well. Um, you know, um, it's not easy. I know that there are times when the people at my circulation desk like, well, I want to be trained to do it just so, I can explain it to people as they're checking out. It's like, well, sometimes it takes longer than the 3 minutes for the checkout interaction to fully explain this to somebody, especially for the setup. The setup is always the hardest, because you get into the situation where, you need an email address. Okay. You need a password. Okay. Then they have to type in the password multiple times. And, you get finger tied and you can't type in the same. I mean, it happens to everybody where you type in the password 3 times and you're locked out. So it gets into that stuff sometimes. And that's when you just kind of do the best you can. And there's no perfect solution for every situation. Just, the more you do this, the more you, and if you're unsure about it and there's somebody else in your library that has been doing it, shadow them a little bit. Don't just stand up, but you can step back a little bit, but kind of listen to what they're saying, watch how they're doing it, and just sort of see them modeling it, and then ask them questions later. That's also something that I had encouraged. If I had a new staff member that was learning, I would say, okay, then, when you see somebody who's helping a patron with their device, kind of go over and listen, to see how it's done, see what types of questions that the patron is asking. A lot of times it's the same kind of questions each time. So, I mean, you get like, oh, okay, people are always going to want to know, how long it checks out for. People are always going to want to know how many they can have, so those kinds of things. And several people, this was mentioned in chat just now, but several, many, or especially earlier on in the early days of when the iPad was new, libraries had petting zoos where they had, a group of devices, and they had staff, that staff could use to learn all the different devices. Our approach here was to do it, we did something similar here, where we had purchased one of all the major devices, and we sort of round robined it with all of our staff members, so that everybody had a chance to try out, using the digital collections on all the different devices. And there were like we had a little, sort of a checklist of things to do on each device. And then when you finish that, then you'd pass it on to the next person. By the end of it, everybody was comfortable with all the devices. And that is a really good way to get to know the devices. But through that's part of why, that's part of where I learned about it's more important to know the operating systems than it is the devices. Because there were at one point, I think 5 different Kindle e-readers available, and all of them worked differently, slightly. And it was maddening because I ended up having to come up with a glossary, so that it was like, this is how you get to the Wi-Fi on this Kindle. This is how you get to the Wi-Fi on this one. And it was different steps every time. So, yes, that is where the difficulty comes in. Fortunately, most of the time people have, either the smartphone or the tablet. And and also, fortunately, the e-reader devices that we see the most are the Kindle Paperwhites. And those, once you know that and how that works, it's pretty straightforward. It's very stable. So they work really, really well with with the collections. They don't work with all the collections, but they're at least stable with Overdrive. Pretty straightforward. Once you know the steps, it's like anything else. Once you've done it a couple times, then you'll be fine with it. So anyway, any other questions? Sorry, the interactive stuff didn't work today. I was looking forward to that. I don't know what I did to break that, but I must have. See, technical difficulties for everybody.
Yeah, gotta roll with it. Well, let's see if we have any final questions.
And here's the resources that I put together for everybody too.
I definitely want to echo the importance of having institutional knowledge and knowing that you will not learn these things overnight. I learn so much every time I'm on the help desk because, we all respond to different cases and libraries and devices, and we've gotten a lot of patron questions in the last several months. And we have kind of like a group chat where we quickly can like reach certain people who have been around for a really long time and know a lot. And what seems really challenging to me, I learn from them and I like model their response and it gets easier, but I'm not an expert, it takes a lot of time.
And one thing also sort of along those lines is just like any tech support arm of any major company, they track patterns. So if you notice that they're the same questions that are being asked over and over again, and it's odd, then talk about it. It's like, who else is getting this question right now? Let's talk about it. And for whatever reason, in High Point, at one point, there was some kind of an update. It was with iPads. Some kind of an update to the iPad was conflicting with our major internet service provider in town. So they were constantly getting the people were getting the same error message, and it lasted for about 6 months, on and off. I mean, just people. So we got to the point where we knew what to say to these people when they called. They basically would have to call the service provider though. And the service provider was getting irritated at us because we kept sending these people to them, but it's like, but it's on your end. And I finally got to a person there and I said, look, we have sent you many of these questions. Well, we didn't track them. I'm like, you're not track. Okay. So I thought they did. So that was one of those things where it's like, well, okay. I was thinking
on our end.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that they would have been like, oh yeah, we know that one. We've seen that one a bunch. And, that person finally said, well, just if they have trouble, just have them ask for me. I'm like, okay, I'm writing your name down. Okay. And he's like, okay. I'm like, good. Because, not all the technicians were aware of what was going on. So no fault, but it was just one of those things where eventually there was another update and it went away. So, but those are the kinds of things that, that get tricky. And, reassuring to the patrons that this is hard, that yes, they may have used, a computer database in their work while they were working. I don't know about you all, but most of the people that I work with are retired. So, that age group. So yes, you may have used this, and they may feel tentative about their skills. But once you get them set up, it's really as simple as using a browser. If you can search for something on the internet, you can search for a book to check out. I mean, it's in the steps involved. It's really no different than, online shopping. So if you do that, it's all very similar. So they do whatever you can to assure the folks that they can do this. I mean, my goal is always to, if possible, have the person leave the library with a book to read, on their device. And sometimes it's not possible, but that's always the goal, or at least have the knowledge of how to get there. And if you're going to follow up with them, then you do that. I can't stress that enough. If you say you're going to follow up, please do that, because it's goodwill for the library. And it really helps them. This may seem like, yet another reference in transaction for you, but it may just really make their day. So anyway.
Absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned the online shopping analogy, because I use that with freshmen at UNC Chapel Hill. So I'm glad it translates across generations.
Yeah, I mean, but they're the ones that want to get into the weeds about the publishing industry. I'm like, no, you really don't want to go there. So it's a long conversation. But I think, if they're really interested, I'll talk to them about it a little bit, and it helps them understand why we limit the way we limit. And it also helps them with, then we need to talk to the funding agencies to make sure you all have more money. I'm like, okay. So it's all to the good. If they can understand that we're limited in what we can provide because of our budget as well, then, because we're trying to meet the demand of, all these people. So
you've got advocates.
Yeah.
So I think we don't have any more questions. So I guess we can kind of wrap up. Thank you so much, Julie, for sharing your expertise and these resources that you've curated and practical advice. I think this is going to be a nice cheat sheet, especially even for me in the future, with the new resources that we have coming up in January. So everyone keep an eye out for the follow-up email that I'll send out later today, with the slides and the recording and a feedback survey. And with that, I'm going to have everyone just enjoy the rest of your Wednesday afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.